Having a roof over one's head is a basic necessity and a human right. However, a large portion of people still do not have housing despite moves to close the deficit. What is the way forward? Welcome to Hude Hour on Hude Network, where we analyze happenings within the humanitarian and development space. As always, I am Amadine Ubewe.
And I am Joan Eze. It's lovely to have you join us. You're welcome. As urban populations grow, the demand for affordable and safe housing is rising rapidly. Viable solutions must be preferred and implemented to save lives and restore dignity.
Today, we will explore the challenges many face, including homelessness and unsafe living conditions, and discuss the vital role that access to housing plays in achieving a better quality of life. We'll also take a look at some stories from across the globe on the journey so far. Now, our headlines. UN says 3 to 4 billion annual need for global housing shortage. Housing units, Nigeria needs 50 or 550,000 housing units annually, minister says. New Zealand to ease zoning restrictions on housing. Well, we'll delve into this and more after the break. Stay with us. By 2030, the UN Habitat estimates that approximately 3 billion people, that's about 40% of the global population, will need access to adequate housing. This demand equates to 96,000 new affordable housing units required every day. Currently, 100 million people are homeless, and 1 in 4 live in unsafe conditions that jeopardize their health and safety. Access to housing is essential for securing employment, education, health, and social services. To effectively address these housing challenges, governments at all levels must prioritize housing in urban policies, placing a strong emphasis on human rights and the needs of people as key components of sustainable urban development.
The United Nations Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights emphasizes that the right to adequate housing should be understood broadly as the right to live in security, peace and dignity. Key aspects of this right include protection against forced evictions and arbitrary destruction of one's home, freedom from arbitrary interference with one's home, privacy and family, the right to choose one's residence, determine where to live, and enjoy freedom of movement.
Indeed, the right to adequate housing does not require the government to build housing for the entire population. Instead, it encompasses several key measures, including preventing homelessness, prohibiting forced evictions, addressing discrimination, focusing on vulnerable and marginalized groups, ensuring security of tenure for all, guaranteeing that one's and everyone's housing is adequate. Achieving these objectives may involve government interventions at various levels, such as legislative actions, administrative measures, policy initiatives, and spending priorities. Well, that's all we'll take for now. We'll go on a break. When we return, we'll delve into our news items to get a glimpse of what's happening around the world in terms of housing. Stay with us. We'll be right back. A UN Habitat report has identified that $3 to $4 billion is required each year to tackle the global housing deficit. The report, titled Unlocking the Potential of Cities, Financing Sustainable Urban Development, emphasizes high land prices and limited suitable land availability. To address the housing shortage, approximately 28.25 million new housing units must be built annually. Meeting global housing targets will necessitate an investment of 3 to 4 trillion per year, along with significant funds for maintaining existing homes. Rapid urbanization and demographic shifts, such as longer lifespans and a rise in single-parent families, have increased housing demand. Currently, about 830 million people live in slums, and by 2030, an additional 2 billion urban residents will create a need for housing for around 3 billion people. or 40% of the global population. Furthermore, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development estimates that global infrastructure investment needs will range from 30 to 40 trillion over the next 20 years. The report also highlights severe infrastructure challenges in developing countries, with 1.1 billion people lacking safe water, 1.6 billion people without electricity, and 2.4 billion people without sanitation services. Well, the numbers there are quite dire. The needs of trillions and billions to fix issues. And we have to speak about the people, billions of people lacking access to complete housing. So it's basically saying that there's a lot to do. And I think the question is, how can this be achieved? Again, the numbers are daunting. At a glance, they make you wonder, how could this be possible?
Yeah.
But then, as always, the advocate is always that we need to start now. And I think people also need to understand the revamping, or perhaps the broad understanding of the word housing or affordable housing. Well, housing specifically, because people seem to think that, that as long as you can have a place to lay your head is housing. But then we're talking about human rights here, and how this is not just a privilege but a necessity and a human right. So people should have that right to stay in places where they have a roof over their head, but also the four corners of the wall. If it's a circular wall, the architect is a bit more, innovative, whatever it may be. People need to be protected from natural elements, because as human beings, we are not meant to brave those elements. Which reminds me of, just a friend of mine who, well, I say, has a kind heart. Whenever it's raining, she wonders what's happening to those people under the bridges, the ones who are homeless and so on. And I think this is a question that should begin to reach out to everyone, policymakers, people in governments, everyone and anyone who can, to understand that we can't say that because of the bare minimum or less than the bare minimum, well, housing is okay. We're going to give you a place where you have to share your accommodation with rodents and with all sorts of wild animals, and we say we've given you housing. It doesn't work that way. And that is why these funds and these numbers should motivate the stakeholders to work towards achieving this, or set realistic targets, rather than saying, well, the problem is too big. As long as we are okay, we don't care about others. So that's the part of this that's important: the empathy and the need for human, or the understanding of human rights.
Yeah, and this brings me to the three basic needs of life. That is shelter, clothing, and food. And of course, we're talking about the housing, that's the shelter part of it. And it's very important for people to have access. I like the fact that you made mention that it's not a privilege, it's a basic fundamental human right for people to have access to houses, and not just living just like that. Houses in a safer environment, because when the climate change comes, you see people that build houses close to the water side. Maybe when flood comes, it sweeps it away, or a lot of climate change that can affect houses. So it's very important that we don't just need houses. We need quality houses that people can live in, and make sure that, okay, yes, their life is safe, their properties are safe, and every other things around them are also safe. So the United Nations Habitat has called that we need a lot of houses. 3 to 4 billion people, dollars is needed to make sure that people have access to houses. For me, I even feel that they need more of it. People that are out there who are homeless that need to have access to where they can lay their heads. And you mentioned something about bridges, and your friend also, trust me, she's not alone. A lot of people also have that feeling that, okay, when it's time for raining season, how do people cope? The leaking roofs. Some people even have leaking roofs. Some don't even have at all. This reminds me of people that actually sleep on the streets, under the bridges. How is it for them? Because apart from rain, we also have sun as well. Like, what happens? The cold. What happens to people that are being affected by natural gifts? So it's really, really a great call for people to have access to houses. All right, let's move straight up to the next news item we have. Nigeria faces a significant housing deficit. requiring the construction of 550,000 housing units each year for the next decade. According to the Minister of Housing and Urban Development, Ahmed Dangiwa, he spoke at the 18th Africa International Housing Show in Abuja, emphasizing the need for approximately 5.5 trillion naira annually to meet this goal under the Renewed Hope Housing Agenda. Dangiwa described the plan to deliver 50,000 units as ambitious, but noted it pales in comparison to the overall requirement. He sees the gap as both a social necessity and a business opportunity for investors, highlighting the government's focus on public private partnerships and a demand driven approach to avoid abandoned projects. An online housing portal has already recorded over 28,000 applications since its launch. The minister stated that adequate housing is essential for addressing various national challenges, including insecurity and social stability. He called for comprehensive policies that promote the construction of affordable housing, suggesting incentives like tax breaks for developers to stimulate investment. This is very important. It's just what we're talking about. But this is coming to Nigeria, one of the developing countries in continent of Africa, where the the urban development minister Dangiwa has made a clarion call that 550,000 um, houses are needed, or houses are needed for people to have access to houses. So it's very important that this is a serious matter that the minister has seen, that people need to come to realize that the government need to approach people based on their one of their basic needs, and this is a very important segment of it.
Indeed, and I think the aspect of him trying to make it an avenue for investment and appealing to people's economic sense is also something to consider here because, like we say, sometimes human beings need incentives to do even what they know to be right. They want to know that, well, we're going to get something out of this. So, with the aid of government and the collaborations, PPP, public-private partnerships, we hope to see a situation where somehow the government is helping these private investors do what they need to do, and that in the long run trickles down to a reduction in prices or affordability for the persons who are going to live in these units. The minister mentioned comprehensive policies, tax breaks for developers, and all of that. So, when people know that we can come into a place and build houses, even though we are building it for profit, we are going to do it in a way that the government is going to help us so that it's subsidized in some manner, and then we can relax on the restrictions for the people, the end consumers. I think that's part of the issues that they are looking at. The target is ambitious, but then he's talking about what the country needs. Now, let's see how that goes, monitor the progress, and see how it develops. Well, that's what we'll take for our news items for now. We'll go on a break and return to bring you a final news item, and then consequently we'll be joined by a guest to do justice on the matter. Stay with us, we'll be right back. All right, welcome back. New Zealand plans to significantly relax zoning restrictions to increase land availability for housing. According to Housing Minister Chris Bishop, in a speech in Auckland, he called the country's housing market one of the least affordable globally and emphasized the need for individuals to have greater choice in how they live. Under the new reforms, local councils will be required to prepare for 30 years of projected growth rather than the current 3 years, and will no longer be able to impose urban limits. The measures also mandate mixed use development and eliminate rules regarding balconies and minimum apartment sizes, changes widely supported by analysts. Bishop argued that local councils often resist growth due to resident opposition, leading to costs for the central government. This new approach aims to empower the market to determine housing needs, addressing a long-standing shortage that has affected political fortunes. Despite a slight easing in housing prices since a peak in 2022, Home costs remain high, averaging 8 times the average income. Research from the OECD indicates that New Zealanders spend a larger portion of their income on rent than any other nation. As public sentiment shifts, particularly among younger generations priced out of the market, the government is taking bold steps to tackle the housing crisis and reshape the future of housing development in the country. Well, it just goes to show that when we talk about housing, we can't not talk about land, and that's what at the end of the day is what leads to the housing we're going to see. But land can be used for a whole lot, and I think New Zealand trying to relax any sort of restrictions they have is a step forward because we understand that economic freedoms in all aspects is what leads to prosperity and growth for a nation. And one of the ways to achieve that is to reduce government restrictions on anything or any kind of restrictions. People should be able to trade among themselves, have freedom to do whatever they want to do. And we realize that that's one of the beauty of the human existence. That when human beings have freedom within their own rights, as much as possible, they tend to do very well rather than perhaps the government trying to always play a role of almost like a big brother trying to control everything. But different strokes for different folks. But at the end of the day, relaxing your restrictions or your bureaucracy and other things that affect people being able to get land or being able to build houses is only going to help in the long run to reduce the housing deficit. And also, it's important to note that countries like New Zealand, they are developing nations, and yet they are consistently, feeling as though they need to do more, which I think is also a call on developing nations to know that, well, we might have to work 3 times as hard as countries that are already doing well because they only need little top-ups to achieve, fair or achieve their sustainable development goals where everything is fair for everyone. Others on the lower rung need to do a whole lot more, and I think that's the message here also. And also, I think governments can take a look at the way New Zealand is approaching this and see how they can also emulate and do better.
Yeah, and still on New Zealanders, it showed that most of them spend most of their income on rents, and it doesn't really speak well because imagine you going to work and you're earning money, but 90% or 70% of your income is going on rent, and you have just 30% to yourself, and you still have other miscellaneous. So it's not really enough. So I think this current policy is the right thing to do to make sure that everybody has access to housing and it will be a very fair one.
All right, fair enough. We'll go on the break now. When we return, we'll be joined by a guest, Adekunle. He is a graduate architect. He joins us today just to the matter of housing. He'll be joining us shortly. Don't go anywhere.
Hey everyone, let's face it, our world today experiences numerous challenges. And guess what? Our community isn't off the hook either. Most of the world issues are either not talked about enough or never talked about at all. But here on Timeline, we've got you covered. We dive deep into issues that affect us every day, leaving behind footprints of wisdom, knowledge, and solutions. Think of it like a roadmap that keeps you on the track for success. So buckle up, because in this new season of Timeline, we're taking another trip through the past, the present, and navigate into a more promising future. Again, we're talking solutions, people, and let's make one thing clear. This is not your average blah 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 convo. This is real talk with a side of inspiration and a sprinkle of wow. I never thought about it like that. I'm your host on this impactful ride. Together, we'll tackle the tough stuff, laugh a little, and find ourselves on the path to positive change. So what are you waiting for? Season 2 of Timeline will be loaded. Let's get started. Hop in and let's drive straight into the heart of issues shaping our world. Let's go. Oh, one more thing. Hit that subscribe button and let's take this ride together.
Every day, amazing stories of hope and tenacity unfold across the globe. On Hude Hour, we dive into these inspiring tales and discuss the vital work being done in the humanitarian and development space. Humanity has never faced a shortage of challenges, yet we rise stronger through teamwork and determination. Though these remedies are often underreported, on Hude Hour, we advocate sustainable solutions. We bring you the latest and most impactful news on how lives are being changed. We engage with young change makers and experts who provide valuable insights into relief efforts and the challenges faced by local communities through a global perspective. Join us every Wednesday by 8 a.m. on Hude Network's YouTube channel as we embark on this journey of positive change. Welcome back. Now we're going straight into a segment where we get to speak with an expert, someone in the sector to speak on the issue at hand, which today is housing. If you're just joining us, that's what we've been talking about so far. We've been joined now by an architect, Adekunle Victor, to do justice to the matter. Welcome to the program.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Disclaimer, graduate architect.
Graduate architect. Fair enough, fair enough. Thank
you so much. Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's start with the basics. Why do you think that the rate of urbanization isn't keeping up with the need for housing? And what would you say are those methods being implemented across the world to handle this issue in areas that are suddenly facing upsurging population and urbanization, without the requisite increase in housing?
Okay, I would say I'm trying to relate that question to what we're having here in Nigeria, right? I would say it's the uprise in population actually. I would say the need for housing is actually needed because we have more people, we have more young people who are in need of this houses. And I would say it's based on economic constraints. The houses that are being provided are too expensive for people to actually get a hold of, or either to own or either to rent. Yeah.
So, but the issue of urbanization also means that things are popping up.
Yes.
Not just population now, maybe industries are causing people to move into areas.
Yes.
Because it's interesting that you can have urban areas being overpopulated, but then you have rural areas. Taking also an example in Nigeria, we've heard people who've traveled across states going kilometers upon kilometers of just empty land.
Yeah.
And then when you get to places that are busy with economic activities, there's not enough houses, or houses are empty because people can't afford them.
Yes.
So what strategies do you think can or are in place to start fixing that?
Okay.
Nigeria and elsewhere.
Yeah, so I would say understanding the link between urbanization or urban spaces and rural settlements. Basically, I wouldn't say it's on the government, but I would say in terms of implementation, we need to understand that for urban centers and rural centers, they need to be like some sort of sync. The way we have them in some Western countries, and whereby you really cannot tell the difference between rural centers or urban centers because it's just all encompassing. Giving you an illustration, I would say for rural settlements and urban settlements, you really should not be able to tell the difference because people that are high income earners and low income earners, they should be able to have some sort of linked relationship together.
All right. I think you've mentioned the harmonization, so to speak, so it doesn't look too different, which reminds me of something we talked about here before in rural Germany, where they're trying to have fiber internet in their own rural version. So really, I think the point really is now is solutions. We know that things are the way they are. So how do we ensure that the areas that are becoming overpopulated, affordable housing starts becoming uh, rampant or ubiquitous?
So I would say there is really no affordable housing, but more of social housing. So I would say the government could create incentives whereby there is subsidized housing, whereby they construct or build these houses and give it out to people for lesser prices that they can afford actually. There is need for harmonization truly because the rural and urban centers are meant to be in some sort of sync and not to be separate from each other. And that also, has to do with some sort of symbiotic relationship.
Interesting.
Okay, fair enough. Adequately, I want you to tell us what are those housing policies that that needs to be addressed based on climate change, because we have issues of when people have houses and we have flooding or maybe earthquake, maybe
Yeah.
in different countries, not maybe in Nigeria, but different climate change. What are those policies that housing are adapting to address climate change?
I would say there are institutions that are responsible for all of these policies, right?
Okay.
There is green financing, whereby just in case there is any disaster or so, there are funds, some sort of funds that are kept aside to address all of this. And that's really how you get to know a resilient settlement because there are these funds that are available to be able to tackle any of these challenges that come up.
All right. Do you think the issue of town planning is also an issue here? Is it something that should be seen as a global, pardon me, a communal issue? Because it seems as though, taking the instances of some places that we have master plans and settlement plans that
Yeah.
end up not being followed because private interest simply go on and do whatever they like. We have sometimes even people leading up to issues of this climate change and others, where they build on places where
They're not
water is
supposed to.
going to pass through and all of that. So how do you think that can be changed or remedied?
Sincerely, I would say that we know the issues. Our regulatory bodies, they know the issues. But as you said, there are people that are profiting off all of these things. The designs are already there, but it's just for the implementation and for them to be strictly followed. For most of the issues that we're facing right now, it's because of these designs are not being followed. So it's just basically for the government to really put their legs down and say developers or private people that are profiting from this, they shouldn't, and then they should really, you know, tackle them seriously.
So you're saying that there's a particular structure that needs to be followed.
Of course,
Building
of course,
houses.
of course. For town planning, for example, we all know there are literally master plans already created. I mean, I think for Abuja's master plan, it's been done since way back. Like the city for Abuja has already been completed. Like we already know where is where. We already know the different zones. It's just for the structures to come up. These governments, they know how to get the funds to do these structures, but they're just still holding back because you know how it is in Nigeria.
All right, let's talk about real experience. I know you obviously being in the field, you have access to cost of items and all of that. So I want you to speak on the debate or an argument people have. Sometimes people wake up and they say government needs to regulate rent prices. Tell these landlords not to raise their funds so high. It happens across the world. People think that you can just tell landlords don't do this and all of that. So based on what you've seen on the back end with inflation affecting prices of things, do you think that is something that can happen realistically?
Really, it actually can, but with the way we are so uncertain about tomorrow in Nigeria, things are really difficult for everybody. I mean, there are even still discussions this year of landlords waking up and literally changing the house rents on a quarterly base, and the tenants are not even able to keep up with paying all of these rents. And so this is due to the fact that the landlords are also pushed to the corner. Things are getting high on a monthly or a daily basis. And so they also have to feed their family, they also have to maintain the building and all of that. Fuel is getting higher, The cost of paint is also getting high. Literally everything is skyrocketing. So I would just say that in terms of that cost perspective, it's like an economy thing. The government really have to look into how they can, some sort of use localized materials and then really cut all this importation and exportation costs. I think that will go a long way in reducing the cost of housing.
Before John comes in here, just to add, when we define affordable housing or housing, it's not just maybe a little roof over your head. Because there are instances where there can be a roof over your head and there are no four walls, and you are still open to the natural forces and the elements.
Yes.
So talking about those basic necessities like clean water, sanitation, and all of that, how do you think housing development initiatives can begin to ensure that these things are up to standard? So that we don't say we've provided affordable housing for this number of persons, but the housing is not really livable in the true sense of it.
I would say it's all in the implementation, right? Like our governments or private agencies, they know how to access all of these things.
Yeah.
And so for all of those clean water and let's say electricity, it could be community based now. For different communities, they face different problems, right? And so let's just say in order to be able to tackle clean water in a particular community, we can try to harness what their own problems are towards getting clean water and try to find that solution and trying to see stakeholders in that community that can maintain the solution for that problem.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's talk about the technology aspect of it. So, what's the role of technology in revolutionizing housing construction and management?
In all of that now we have technologies that are managing and maintaining time flow for projects. We have robots that are even mixing concrete and doing all of that. We have computer aided designs that can give you analysis of structures, that can give you data that are needed to be able to execute different types of building at different locations.
Does this in any way trickle down to affordable housing, or does it make things more expensive?
It's in between. It's actually in between. Yes. Because sometimes for you to be able to actually get technology that can do this thing, it might be very costly. So I would say sometimes it's expensive, sometimes it's less expensive.
All right. Let's talk about alternatives. It's still in the interest of solutions. For instance, we've seen certain government officials or ministers across the world suggesting new materials, saying this one works better, this lasts longer. So, from your perspective, what are some reasonable alternatives that could cheapen housing or housing materials that could lead to affordable housing for people that people might not consider? When I say that, I mean things that perhaps someone might think is disposable,
Okay.
or is cheap, or it's not good enough, but innovative ways to use them.
Okay, so I would use our neighboring country. Let's just say, like for Uganda, for example, now they have excess clay. It's affordable. They don't have to export nothing. It's accessible to them, and then they make use of this for literally almost a good number of their structures. Even maybe their state house, like that's the presidential villa, they make use of clay. So as well in Nigeria, we can look at materials that are accessible to us that we necessarily don't need to export, from other countries. I mean, we can look at there's bamboo, there's even clay itself, right? And then all of these things is just to be able to cut cost and then be able to provide shelter and create functional spaces for people.
Yeah, fair enough. I think those are things to consider. And then, as you mentioned, clay, I actually do hear that clay science
Yes.
is becoming the new rage, and I hope to see how that reduces cost for people. But so, finally, on the final note, do you have any sort of advice? Maybe not to the government now, we've talked about the government, to your colleagues and others within the sector. There are people who want to get into housing and have big ideas and plans. What would you say they should consider? Because at the end of the day, the reason we're talking here is because housing is meant to be a right, not just a privilege.
Yeah.
So, In that sense, how can those within the sector, the experts, the stakeholders, approach this so that they consider that basic human rights and not just perhaps profit and all the rest?
Okay, so I would say we've talked about sustainable materials, like you mentioned, clay, right, and other things. So we can, so for people in my own profession, we can think of innovative designs that are environmental friendly, that are sustainable, that can be resilient, that can withstand time. And so these innovative designs will actually help cut down costs. We should look at sustainable materials. We should look at things we necessarily don't have to bring elsewhere, but then we have to do it with what we already have in Nigeria.
But just to run up, can you speak on the issue of the manpower in this? Sometimes I think countries do even need to export. Do you think there needs to be some sort of revamping on vocational education?
On exporting,
No, we're talking about the materials. But I'm
yes,
saying that apart from the architects like yourself who do
yes,
the work at the top,
design, yeah,
the people who are actually moving the bricks and mortars and doing all of that, we've seen instances where POP ceilings sometimes fall down
fall down.
or buildings collapse and all of that. And then we've also seen where different countries have to import. So they go to neighboring countries to get because they don't have enough
People,
skilled
yeah,
or
people to do
semi-skilled
that,
as some
yeah.
people call it. So
Okay.
is there a gap there that needs to be fixed?
Um, I would say for Nigeria, sometimes for some specific works, yes, yes, actually. But all of that can actually be settled with if we actually do this for a period of time, whereby those people that are even being brought to do those works, do some sort of workshop for our own people to enlighten them on how to do these things. So it's actually in the long run cut costs for every single person because we get people that are now able to do these things that we bring people in to do for us.
Yeah, that was, I think it's a great idea. It can even extend to what they call train the trainers, where you train people who then train others. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank
in.
you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, that's how we round up this segment of the program. Don't go anywhere. We've been talking on housing, and I'm going to break when we return to delve into the aspects of verified voices. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. We've been having a conversation on the issue of housing and ensuring housing for all, affordable housing to be precise. Now we're delving into the next segment of the program, verified voices. Let's take a look at what the key stakeholders in the sector are saying on this particular topic at the moment. So let's take our first verified voice of the day now. Well, from UN Habitat, cities are growing rapidly, but as more people call cities home, they face growing challenges affordable housing, climate resilience, and infrastructure that keeps up with demand. These topics are at the heart of the dialogue at the hashtag WF12. Join the conversation. Well, that was an event at the UN Habitat. You can see the issues are affordable housing, climate resilience, and infrastructure. This just goes to show about this is about the SDGs about building our cities. That's part of what we talked with our guests, how town planners are also part of this. And when we are making these plans, it can't be in isolation. There should be some sort of broad framework that everyone keys into. And I think there needs to be more regulation, particularly in developing nations, because people tend to think that they can just acquire land and then begin their projects. Nobody really knows if they're up to standard, and that's why we have some building collapses here and there. And then when you factor in climate change also, so much can happen that if you do not think ahead, you might not prepare for it. So if someone who's not up to date with global best practices might be using some outdated manner to build, and then for the coming events and coming things that might happen, they are totally unprepared. So I think that's what to really take away there.
All right, that's fair enough. Let's move to the next verified voice that we have. Still, but this is United Nations Habitat Africa. Says housing is not just about providing hashtag shelter. It's about creating dignified hashtag living conditions, fostering economic opportunities, and building resilient communities, remarked the executive director, Anna Claudia Ross B1, during the Affordable Housing and Urbanization Week in Kenya. This is what we're talking about. That it's not just providing housing, it's all about providing a place where people can be safe and they understand that, okay, they are safe, their properties are safe, and that's exactly what United Nations Habitat in Africa. And this was done in Kenya. And for it to be going around, the international organizations are making sure that other countries are seeing the need for this. And it's a very, very um, a right decision to take.
Well,
That's it.
and also, I think the issue of economic empowering people for economic prosperity is the fact that if you have a place to stay, you have somewhere to lay your head, a conducive place. It helps you prepare for work. And you know the future of work now, or let me not say the future of work,
Yeah.
current realities and perhaps future ones include either remote work or hybrid work. So sometimes people's homes are even becoming
Their
their
workplace.
offices,
Yeah.
and so it also helps in building communities at large. Let's take a look at another verified voice there. Uh, UN Habitat Ghana says, did you know Ghana faces a 1.8 million housing deficit with many urban dwellers living in overcrowded settlements? Addressing this challenge is key to achieving sustainable and resilient cities for all. Let's build a better urban future. 1.8 million housing deficit with many urban dwellers living in overcrowded settlements. This usually happens, like we said, because of urbanization. Everybody's going to the cities to make a life, to become successful, and send, to cater for their families and so on. And it's causing a strain. So that's why you find that some cities that have little land mass have humongous populations, while cities on the outskirts or those neighboring them have large land masses but are mostly, or if not, empty. So I think it's a case of where one of the issues we talked about is also the issue of transportation. A proper transportation system makes housing, better for people, because if you have to work in that small city, but the transportation makes it so smooth and easy for you to move from the nearby cities to that place to have a proper commute like we see in developed countries. It makes it so easy for people so that you know you're going to have affordable housing, safe housing, the best housing, and still have a good paying job that probably requires you moving to where the people are, because that is what drives some of these economies. There's a bunch of people somewhere, everybody wants to be there because the market is there. But then if you have to live there, you have to see, you now see people squatting, you have 10 people in a room and so on and so forth, which is not conducive at the end of the day. So I think the key takeaway for me there is that we should start to consider that the transport system is a part of ensuring affordable housing overall.
Yeah, 1.8 million people is a very, very large number for me. And talking about lack of housing, this issue of squatting, it's a very, very serious issue, because by the time you are jam packed in a room, a lot of things happen. You see yourself going through some health crisis, or maybe someone that is ill, that's carrying a communicable disease, can easily affect others. So living in a very congested environment, or in a house that is congested, because people cannot truly afford these houses, so they have to squat with their friends and all that. So it's really, really a serious matter that needs to be tackled. And just like normal sentence we make, it's better we act now so that it can be resolved.
All right, so that's fair enough, and that's how we end the program for today. We do hope that all stakeholders are working hard to ensure affordable housing, and all the solutions being proffered are being listened to with a keen ear. Do join us once again next week. Hude Hour reaches you every week, Wednesday, 8 a.m. We'll be here once again to bring you more analysis in the humanitarian and development space. Have a nice day. See you some other time. I am Amadine Oberi. Bye for now.
And I am Joe Nazing. Thank you for watching.